how do we solve data movement challenges in a hybrid data center?
Data movement challenges. To me, that sounds like that question basically is asking about bandwidth. Because how do we solve it? And, unfortunately, the answer to this is not always easy, because once you pass certain thresholds, I like to joke that the answer is more 10 gig circuits. And that's only partially a joke, because the reality is once you need more than 10 gigs, there isn't really anything more cost competitive on a per bit basis past 10 gig. People talk about 100 gig. There's specifications being drafted right now for 400 gig, and there's 40 gig. All of those cost more than the equivalent multiple of 10 gigs, which is really quite unfortunate for some of these applications. And you think big data, this kind of stuff gets hard to move in and out. You've got to get into AWS with 100 gigs. That's a non-trivial amount of traffic flows. That's probably a decent percentage of what they've got at the site. That's probably the biggest problem with it right now. And so how do you solve it? Write your application more efficiently so you don't need to move 5 terabytes of data for no reason from one half of it to the other. I mean, really, that's the answer you start getting to, because people have solved programming problems for a long time by throwing more compute power at it, and that just doesn't really work at the network layer. Anybody who says it does just hasn't done networking at large scale. This would be my response to it, because networking, you start to get to this point where additional circuits are just very expensive, even if they're in your own facility.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true. Another thing that I've seen is actually working in a hybrid approach to it. So a specific project that I know of, they have 2.5 petabyte data sets that have to be distributed around the country for people to work off of. There's no way that they can literally transfer all of that data, because it would take a month for them to go and ship it. It makes more sense to put it on a hard drive and ship it FedEx than it does to go through a 10 gig circuit. So what they're doing is they're setting up a hybrid approach between data centers that they actually own and operate, end user facilities, and cloud providers that have in-region access for those companies, so that they're storing that data center per region, kind of transferring all of the changes between all of the different environments, so that they're just having deltas going through and they're not transferring the entire overall system. They can just, have their overall data set and have it shared between, and any researchers that join into it locally can work off of that local repository.
So this is a great example of fixing the application so you don't have to move as much data. and really, those optimizations are becoming much more important than they used to be. And in the realm of basically big data and video, neither of which you can move around in significant quantities without causing problems for yourself from either a cost basis standpoint or just sheer number of circuits required to do it. And I don't like going back to the age where it's quicker to ship something via FedEx than it is to use the network. That to me is just terrifying as a network person. It's like, no. There's got to be a better solution than physically shipping something on an airplane.
Exactly. It's definitely true. We don't want to go back that way, especially when we have all the bandwidth we do available. It's kind of something where we've built out the infrastructure. Now it's time to kind of get back to the efficiencies and truly think about the situation. So that's something that's really on the customer here, that the end user has to decide when they go into a hybrid solution. That's just the part that doesn't get provided to you by the service provider. You have to think about how you're using your data and how you actually want to distribute it out. It's not something where you just run into a hybrid solution and suddenly you can access the data between points. You might have all that scalability, the dependable circuits, and all that transport that's burstable and available to you, but you still have to think through how exactly you'll use that and how exactly it fits your individual business use case the best.
Yeah, I think probably the most interesting demonstration of this, and then I'll drop this, was I saw a graphic one time that compared CPU speed increases, i.e. Moore's Law, and cost basis on that to the speed of network interface connections increasing. And it's actually quite terrifying. So the speed of computers is growing much faster than our ability to interconnect them. Which is on long distances, and that's actually something that really is going to be a problem going forward. We've got the 1 gig Ethernet spec came out in the 90s, the 10 gig one came out in the early 2000s, and the 100 gig one didn't come out until 2 years ago. And the 400 gig one isn't done, and the 40 gig one came out, but it's only sort of been adopted by some vendors. And you start thinking about what that means compared to the equivalent processing power increases over that period. And each one of those increases was a 10x, a 10x, and then a 4x, and then a 10x of the previous one. And that's, we're not going to see growth. The assumption right now is we're not going to see 1 terabit Ethernet for a while. The 100 gig is here and is in cores of infrastructure. 400 gig is coming and will probably be available on some vendors in the next year and a half at the very highest end of the core. But past that, 1 terabyte Ethernet is barely on the discussion boards. This is not what we're used to on the CPU side of things. Every few years it would double. It's just not what's happening.
Yeah, no, it's something where it's always catching up. And it's interesting, separate from the bandwidth, because the bandwidth is a large part of this. But I think another reason why hybrid has taken a lot of a stronghold as opposed to any conventional methods people are running into is actually IPv6 deployment, because people aren't quite sure how to get started with it. Their service provider to their premise location, whether data center or office, may not actually have IPv6 ready yet, and providers and customers are running out of addresses. So it becomes easier for somebody looking to provide out that application to go into a hybrid model where they have their internalized resources that they can privately address at their office, and they run across a transport connection which doesn't require public address space to interconnect, and they can actually make their applications work and test them with a cloud provider that's already integrated and worked in IPv6 to their overall solution.